What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with the first in a four-part series called The Resurrection of Magneto, and this comic is gonna blow your mind. So, the first thing this does is this picks up with Storm basically having a dream where she's almost kind of mentally reached out to by Magneto, or at the very least, sees him in the sense that he's just kind of standing on this shore, right, with this lava and all this kind of stuff, and says, Aurora, I was wrong. Now, first things first, this is not the far shore. For those of you guys who are curious, if you don't know what the far shore is, it's basically the last stop for any and all cosmic entities that exist out there. That is not the role of Magneto here. Instead, Magneto has basically perished, right? He's dead. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, he died during Judgment Day in probably one of the most dope moments ever in the history of the comics, where his heart gets ripped out and he's just using his control over electromagnetism to like keep the blood pumping through his body. He lasts just long enough to continue the fight and then dies. It was amazing, right? Judgment Day, it is in the X-Men playlist. Make sure you guys check that out at the end of the video. The Avengers versus the X-Men versus the Eternals. The Eternals get wrecked, by the way, which makes sense because they suck. So here's the thing, right? Storm, in realizing that Magneto is reaching out to her, is in effect in some capacity saying that he's not necessarily alive, but he can be retrieved. And the reason why this is so important is that in Marvel Comics, death is not an absolute, right? And a lot of people kind of know this, right? You know, like characters come back from the dead all the time. True, right? But like when you actually get into the nitty gritty of it, you can travel to the afterlife, retrieve the soul of a person, and bring them back. It's been done before. So it's not an uncommon thing to take place. Well, it is kind of uncommon for it to play out that way, but the fact is that it can be done. The reality here is precious few people actually know how to do this. Doctor Strange is dealing with everything going on in gods right now, right? Like the return of Oblivion, the Skinner boxes, which is ridiculously amazing concept, right? Like there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's precious few people she can reach out to, but there's one individual in the entirety of the Marvel Universe that had previously given her the ability to transition from one dimension to another. And that person, ladies and gentlemen, is Adam Brashear. So she leaves and she goes to visit the Blue Marvel. Now, I told you guys there was no direct indication that Enigma, as he was presented in Defenders Beyond, and like the Dominion that we see in the X-Men comics, that they're connected. But all of it seems like it is, because the writer of this comic, Al Ewing, and Kieran Gillen, the guy who's working on the X-Men comics right now, they work close at hand. So when Storm shows up here, you immediately have Adam Brashear talking to Taya, the mother of Galactus from a previous universe. There's a whole story behind it. We can cover it if you're interested. But basically, they're talking about the nature of Enigma, the being they encountered that was originally introduced in Defenders Beyond as being more powerful than the one above all. It's all tied together, right? The fact that it's all kind of crossing over here shows it's the exact same being. They're hunting for the same person. They just don't realize they're hunting for the same person, right? The X-Men and the Defenders. Now, of course, Taya immediately freaks out because she thinks that Storm's here to attack her, and Adam Brashear's like, no, it's cool. She's a friend. It's all copacetic. And so what Storm does is she explains everything going on to Adam Brashear, that Magneto had previously died, that she's looking to bring Magneto back because his power is necessary, but his role is necessary. Let me tell you something, man. Magneto in recent years, I love Magneto during House and Powers of X, don't get me wrong. His time during X-Men, it's been dope. And there's been some amazing, like just amazing moments, right? When he tells those people during House of X, you have new gods now. I mean, just stuff like that, right? There's been some dope moments with Magneto in recent years. But old school Magneto from like back in the 80s, man, that guy would do whatever it took. There was an alternate reality story where he eradicated all life on Earth with an EMP because it was the only way to win. I mean, dude, this guy, Magneto, dude, man, let me tell you something. I can't wait. I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. But it is an exciting time in the X-Men comics. I can't wait for Magneto to come back. Dude, I'm so hyped. So what ends up happening is that a kind of portal's created. Right now, the nature of this portal is that it's going to send Storm down the same path that Magneto went. In effect, she's going to basically transition to the afterlife. But what ends up happening here is she jumps through the portal before the readings can be verified by Adam Brashear. Now, a lot of this is just tied into the fact that Storm's like, I'm not waiting, right? And she just kind of leaps in. Adam Brashear, being a scientist, right, being as powerful as he is, he's all about readings, right? All about making sure that everything's balanced and that kind of stuff. And she even kind of says, like, I'm standing at the edge of a rooftop. Below me is a vast ocean. I have been here before. There is no safety. only the leap, right? She just leaps into the portal, right? Just doesn't even ask any questions, just jumps straight in. And when she gets through, she arrives at a way station, right? Basically the waiting room, as it's effectively called. And what you have here are these paths that are basically represented by cosmic entities, the living tribunal and Mistress Death and so on and so forth. The wheel, right, as it was established and introduced in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, but waiting for her specifically is Tarn the Uncaring. Now, here's the thing, right? Tarn the Uncaring, for those of you guys who never saw our videos on the Sword event, right? Tarn the Uncaring, which that's also in the X-Men. You guys really need to check out the X-Men playlist if you have not done it yet, because so much amazing stuff happens. Tarn the Uncaring is a mutant that has the ability to control DNA. The long and short of this is he can shut your powers off, he can turn your powers back on, he can give you new powers, he can change your powers, he can do all kinds of stuff, right? Like this guy, Magneto killed him by crushing his head. It was amazing. It was like this fight that happened so fast. Magneto took his helmet off and like put it on Tarn's head and then crushed the helmet with his powers. And Tarn died so fast. He died faster than Black Bolt would if he fought anybody meaningful, if you can even believe that, right? Because Black Bolt sucks. He would die almost immediately against anyone who matters. But the thing about this is that Tarn kind of taunts Storm a little bit, and he even kind of answers her questions to a degree, because this space was created by the Scarlet Witch. That's one of the things to know. She literally created a space outside of all space and time so that whenever mutants specifically, right, mutants only, whenever they die, they would go to this place as a kind of waiting room of sorts. And then they would choose their path, and then they would move on to whatever that path happened to be. Now, it was a little mysterious, right? Like, do they choose their path, or is their path chosen for them? And there were a lot of questions that were introduced that were just never fully fleshed out. But the fact remained, Tarn just kind of taunts her a little bit and is like, Magneto chose one of these paths. Which one do you think it is? But it doesn't matter, because like, I'm going to attack you now and destroy you. But when Storm asked the question, like, where are all the mutants who died? He's like, I mean, do you think they would just be crowded in this place? You think they would just hang out waiting for you to show up to rescue them from this fate, right? Like, no, like they moved on and they went and did their own thing. Some of those mutants you will see again, and some of them you will never see again, right? Because they're just done and gone and out of the picture. But Tarn, of course, lashes out with the intention of destroying Storm, because when he asks her, what are you looking for? Her response is, I'm looking to resurrect Magneto, which pisses him off to no end, because Magneto was the guy who killed him. And so, of course, he kind of attacks her for a little bit. But the bigger point of this, right, it's not really the fight between Storm and Tarn the Uncaring, because it is cool to see, and just like we would expect, Storm absolutely dominates this guy. What she realizes is that when a person enters this place, the rules and laws of the normal universe do not apply, which is to say, Tarn can only control his own DNA. He cannot do anything to Storm. And so Storm just overpowers this guy with a quickness. And then once the dust settles and he's quote unquote destroyed, if you want to call it that, she's met by ashake or asake. I'm not really sure exactly how you pronounce this. Let me know down in the comments section for those of you guys who are familiar with Egyptian dialect and you know exactly how the name is supposed to be pronounced, because she is of Egyptian heritage. And in fact, she is the ancestor of Storm. Now, an important thing to understand here, right, between, I want to say it was Gambit Volume 1, the original miniseries, issues 2 and 3, and then New Mutants Volume 1, issue 32, I think, this answered the question of why it was that Storm seemed to have latent magic potential, because she always kind of had that ability, but it was never fully fleshed out. And the fact is that, like, her ancestor is a direct servant of Ashtur, one of the elder gods that existed on Earth, and was granted the ability to manipulate magic. And so that ability to control magic was kind of passed down the generations to Storm herself. Now, it doesn't mean that Storm is on par with someone like Stephen Strange or something like that, but it was always just kind of like a undercurrent of her character that was never really overly explored, but was always kind of there and would like crop up occasionally, right? So the thing is, like, as they meet each other and as they talk, that this woman provides a little more concept here, right? A little more explanation here, but it's still very cloak and dagger, because she asks the question, she says, tell me why you came here. The response to Storm, it feels foolish to tell her that I threw myself into the unknown on the strength of a dream. So one of the things to know is that Storm thinks that to herself, but her mind is basically being read here. So the response here is, dreams are vital, little Aurora. They are messages from gods, even sometimes from eternity, the great all, and carry meaning beyond meaning. Dreams are binding. The response to Storm, I dreamed of Magneto. He was standing on a strange shore, readying himself to enter a ruined city. His face turned away, but in torment. It was more than a dream. It was a distress call, right? The response that she gets here is yes, but detail is important. We are in the place where magic lives. Symbols and metaphors all are the true reality. Anything you can recall may point that way, i.e., that could be any number of locations, right? We need more detail so we know where he went to, right? Like it's like saying I had a dream of a guy who was standing on a beach. Okay, cool. Well, on this beach, right, as you look around, did you happen to see like a sign that said Venice Beach? Because now we know what beach he's at, so we can just go there, right? That's basically what this says, because again, there's multiple paths to choose here. And so Storm simply says his helmet was at his feet and there was more than one. 5 helmets. I don't know why there were 5. The response, 5 is the number of magic, but it has other associations. The 5th sphere is the sphere of judgment, or no mercy is found there. I must ask, was this man truly your friend? And Storm kind of has a bit of a recollection, right? She looks back on like a lot of the old stories when it came to Magneto and different things along those lines where they were enemies. Something really important to point out here, specifically to the history of Magneto, this little moment in the panel where you have him holding Kitty Pryde, that was a very, very landmark story. In fact, that took place in Uncanny X-Men issue number 150. That was the story where, with Kitty Pryde being Jewish and Magneto being Jewish, when he attacked her, right, because she was trying to stop him from one of his crazy extremist acts, he had realized he was becoming the very thing that he was trying to fight against, in the sense that attacking a young Jewish girl, he saw himself, while not necessarily physically, but at least philosophically, the same as the Germans from World War II. And so while this did happen during the events of Uncanny X-Men number 150, what you saw was a 50-issue redemption arc that culminated in the iconic Uncanny X-Men issue number 200, where Magneto is standing in chains on the front cover, and he's handing himself over to the World Court, right? Atoning for his past misdeeds. That's what Storm's kind of recollecting on, right? As often as she and Magneto were enemies, they were also allies. And when it really came down to it, right, during the events of Judgment Day, Magneto sacrificed his life for the mutant population. And so that's where she just kind of muses to herself, or sort of says, he was many things. He is owed many things. If he is suffering, I have to try. Because if this was just like Magneto from Uncanny X-Men, from like an Uncanny X-Men comic in like some random month in 1977, then she would have just been like, I mean, you know, yeah, he died, man. It happens sometimes. I don't know what to tell you, right? And she would have just left him there, right? That would have just basically been it. But Magneto is needed because between his leadership skills and just his raw power, this guy is enough to more than turn the tide against the fight against Orcus, right? Like the governmental agency that's trying to wipe out mutants on Earth. And so that's where Storm says, but now I have a question that must be answered. The mutant souls that were here waiting, what became of them? And the response, would you wait forever? I do not know where they are. I only know which path they took. And they say, her road, right? She points the finger to basically Mistress Death, that in effect, they passed on to the true afterlife. But that's when the statement's made, then they are gone forever with no hope of return, really more of a question. The response, there is always hope. They crossed one threshold already, and death is not the barrier that many believe, which again, is an accurate statement. We know that from just a multitude of comics. When Jean Grey as the Phoenix met Mistress Death, who was actually in disguise as a construction worker, and explained the nature of death, that at any point in time, a person can be pulled from death, right? We've seen Thanos do that with people. We've seen Thanos banned from the realm of Mistress Death, right? So again, death is not an absolute. A person can be retrieved from there. It just depends on the circumstance. But even the statements made, like, you can escape this place if you do not tarry, because what's happening in the real world is that Taya and Adam Brashear are trying to resuscitate her, right? She's not willing to come back yet. But the fact is, Storm says, that changes nothing. I came to help my friend and comrade find the mercy that is being withheld from him, or if he wishes, to bring him back to the fight. And if I must, and that's where the statement is finished for her, you'll bring back every dead mutant with him. Oh, Aurora, there are forces to which even a goddess must bow, specifically addressing the force of the living tribunal. Now, as far as how the living tribunal is involved with the passing on of the mutant population, we don't necessarily have an answer to that question, but it could be that the living tribunal simply decrees you have passed on from the living world. There is no coming back for you, and there's nothing Storm could do to bring them back, right? It would be just a barrier that she can't cross with no conceivable way of bringing them back into the real world. And so that's where a kind of recollection comes from Ashake. I guess we're going to call her that. I don't know exactly how you pronounce her name, but she simply says, like, what you're dealing with here is a greater conflict on a greater scale. For Storm, she's thinking about Orcus because Storm doesn't realize the bigger picture. She's not focusing. She doesn't know about like Enigma or the Dominion and all that kind of stuff. She's casually aware of it, but she doesn't understand how deep it goes. But that's the point that Asake is making here, is like there's a much bigger conflict at play, a much grander conflict at play. Magneto holds the key. You will need him. And so what she tells Storm is that Magneto entered into that tower. He went that way. Now the fate that awaits him, we do not know, but you must follow the path. And when Storm does, she falls down through the tower and comes directly in contact with the Dominion. Now, the cool thing here is that the Dominion, this is really going to be clarified in a pretty phenomenal way. But for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with that, right, we did make a video that specifically addressed this, but the long and short of this is that the Dominion themselves can best be represented as like Galactus, right? So Galactus travels around, he consumes worlds to satiate his own energy, right? And he sends the Silver Surfer out in order to find worlds that he can consume. Now, with that example in mind, the Dominion are the result of any kind of artificial technological advancement reaching an apex, which is to say, it just crosses a threshold, right? It just learns so much information that it then transcends beyond the universe itself and travels into a space beyond the universe. But there is always a desire to learn knowledge. And so what the Dominions do is they send out emissaries. That's the Phalanx. So the Phalanx kind of play the role of Silver Surfer in this example. The Phalanx travel through a universe looking for worlds that have reached a level of technological advancement that's basically worth the time of a Dominion. And when that happens, those worlds will be brought into the fold, quote unquote, by the Phalanx and will be handed over to the Dominion, which will absorb all that knowledge and then become more powerful. Now, the cool thing here is the Dominions literally say, greeting, acknowledgement, warning. Now, the reason why you see it written this way, this has been a thing ever since Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four and the way the Celestials from the alternate reality communicated. It's a method of communication that's established by beings that are trying to communicate with humans, but are not humans, usually technologically advanced in some capacity. So just something to be aware of here. But they say, from matter is energy made, from life is information made. Life ends, information is forever. We are forever, outside ever, beyond ever. We are Dominion, you are linear, we are not. You are single-minded, morsel, atom, communion error, not big enough. More information density required for resource growth into consumable. So, ask. The whole thing behind this is that what's happening is they think Storm just doesn't really have enough information to matter to them, right? Like, it'd be like Galactus consuming Pluto as opposed to consuming like Earth, right? I mean, it might tide him over, but it's not enough to really satisfy him. And so that's why they tell her, ask questions, because depending on the kind of questions she asks, they'll gain a better understanding of how much knowledge she has. And if she has a vast amount of knowledge or knowledge that's worth their time, they'll consume her. Like if Reed Richards fell through this place, they would consume him in an instant. They would be like, this guy knows everything about everything. Cool, let's eat him, right? And that would be it. They would absorb his knowledge into themselves. So Storm asked the question, where am I? Now, one of the things that I want you guys to know, this will invoke the Beyonders. They will be brought up here because what the Dominion says is beyond, outside, mystery subsector designated overspace. Basically, they're beyond all space and time, outside of all existence. Now, they also say meeting space for cosmic intellects, higher thought forms, accessible via singularity, negative zone, origin point, multiverse 5, Cosmos stage 6. Now, the junction to everywhere. So this is one of those things where it's kind of ambiguous because spaces beyond the multiverse in Marvel Comics are represented in different ways. There's the far shore, there is just simply this vast white space where the cosmic entities meet, specifically where they met during the events of Infinity War, after Infinity Gauntlet was over, when Adam Warlock had the Infinity Gauntlet and was put on trial by the cosmic entities before the Living Tribunal. It's all those kinds of things, right? All those different spaces. but different writers will depict it in different ways. If I were a betting man, I would argue this is beyond the far shore, right? This is just way, way out there in a space that just hasn't truly been explored before. And so Storm muses to herself and she asks, Dominion, Adam mentioned one of those. Are there others like you? The response, this is where the Beyonders get invoked, but this is also where Enigma comes into play, right? They say various exist, work, consume, grow as dominions exist, work, consume, and grow. Basically, there are a multitude of us all doing the exact same thing. One threatens infinite power, human level thought, threat potential, infinite, threat duration, forever. Omegas, Beyonders, are afraid. They are linear, we are not. Containment attempted, multiversal reboot attempted, not enough. So in effect, what these guys are saying here, because they are referencing Secret Wars from 2015, if you haven't picked up on that already, right? The difference between any of the Dominions that are out there and Enigma, or the Enigma Dominion represented in the X-Men comics, is that these Enigma are just the result of artificial intelligence, right? But artificial intelligence, at least in its current form, does not think the way a human does, right? Human thought potential is limitless. And so Enigma, unlike these, thinks like a human. It's like if a human had gained or had blended itself with technology and then achieved a vast level of power. It's beyond anything out there. And that's why they say the Enigma threatens everything. It threatens all known cosmic entities. In a lot of ways, depending on how you want to look at it, you could see the Enigma as even being like Marvel writers or Marvel editors, not in the sense that they threaten everything, but the amount of power they have over everything. They can just edit whatever they want to, change whatever they want to, and it becomes absolute. Specifically, and this is something that we already knew about from Defenders Beyond, that the Enigma Dominion being out there had been known for quite some time. We had only just realized it, that the real motivation behind the Beyonders initiating Secret Wars, as much as I don't like the change in motivation, is that they were looking for a way to basically blink out the multiverse in order to give the Enigma no reason to come here. And then in turn, they could bring it back once the Dominion had basically just moved on, right? And so it would be unaware that the multiverse had returned, and it would just kind of go and do its thing, and that would basically be it. Such as it was, the superheroes fought for the return of the multiverse, not truly understanding the motivation of the Beyonders, which makes sense because they never explained themselves, right? They were just like, we are from beyond and we're just gonna wipe everything out. And Dr. Doom's like, no, you're not either. He unleashes the Molecule Men and the Molecule Men blow up and destroy all the Beyonders. And then Dr. Doom basically seizes their power and then you get Secret Wars 2015. So it's one of those things where because of that, right, like a lot of this is kind of mysterious. And even Storm says, I can feel the danger in this place. These intelligences hunger in some eternal way that I cannot fathom. And each new drop of knowledge makes me a sweeter meal. So be it. Ask your third question, Aurora, make your third wish, and pray the genies grant it without asking their price. And so she says, I am seeking the soul of a man, Max Eisenhardt, Magneto. And they say, we know who he is. We are aware of him, right? A rare atom. We looked at him, paired his self to the base strata, cataloged his pain, studied him, then sent him on. Not viable, useful enough information for assimilation, consumption, but information of interest, right? So he didn't know enough for us to absorb him into ourselves, but you do, Storm. So like literally they try to eat her. They try to consume her. Now at that moment, Storm basically attacks them just long enough to effectively make her escape. And when that happens, she just kind of comes falling down into the same location Magneto was in, surrounded by these almost kind of helmets for herself. Not really helmets, but like the little, tiaras, if we want to call it that. Whatever you want to call it, right? But she's surrounded by these things, and she's like, wherever it is that Magneto's at and whatever he's dealing with, it is in effect his own personal hell. So I have to go and find him, rescue him from it, and bring him back. So what this does is this opens up with a little bit of a story here, which is to say, Namor the Submariner and Magneto had gone on a mission at some point and come across these sea witches. A bargain was struck and Magneto was given a key. He wasn't told what the purpose of the key was. He was simply just told he would know it when he needed it. And even if he died, that key would stay with him. That key will be important to the ending of this story. But in the here and now, as we talked about in the first video, which if you need to get caught up, you'll find a link to the playlist. It's one video long, not a great big huge deal. But Magneto had died during Judgment Day, and we didn't really know exactly what had happened to him, but he's effectively in purgatory here. Specifically, he's in the waiting room, and this is where those 20 million mutants come into play. So as most of you guys know from following our coverage of the fall of the House of X, the idea of really just X-Men for the last 2 or 3 years was that any time a mutant died, that mutant could be resurrected because their thought patterns and everything were constantly being backed up. The big question people had is, what about mutants who died before that entire process came into existence? That was the basis behind the story, The Trial of Magneto, that Scarlet Witch wanted to make up for the fact that she had taken away 98% of the mutant population's powers during House of M. And so what she did is she told Magneto, I need to die and then experience the resurrection protocols, right? Be brought back to life. When that happened, her staging her death and all that kind of stuff, that what she did is she built the waiting room. What this means is that every mutant who's ever died in the history of Earth is in the waiting room. They all experience their own kind of afterlife, if you want to call it that, but they're there, an army 20 million strong. And on Earth, Cerebro can grab those different mutants and resurrect them. So if the X-Men are able to find a way to mass produce resurrection, they will have an army of 20 million mutants like that. It's gonna be nuts, right? Just imagine that. 20 million mutants storm the planet Earth, all under the leadership of the X-Men. All hell's gonna break loose. It's gonna be crazy. But for Magneto himself, and I love the way this story's done, he's basically just kind of wallowing in his own self-pity, right? What he says here is he says, as a boy, I turned my back on God forever. I told Aurora that once, right? Storm, basically. And he says, I could no longer believe in any power that could fail my family, my people, that would allow death and horror on such a scale. Of course, he's referring to the Holocaust from World War II. And he says, and with nothing to prey on, I swore to myself that if I had the power, if I only had a chance, I would not fail. And he says, I failed many times. I failed loved ones and friends and strangers. I failed my child. Of course, he's referring to Anya. Now, not everybody knows about Anya in Marvel Comics, and she's one of the most tragic stories that you're ever going to hear. The long and short of it is that when Magneto and his wife took off from Germany and basically took up residence in like a local fishing town or like just a small little residential town, Magneto changed his identity and everything, kept his entire self under wraps. But he and his wife had a child named Anya. Eventually, the townspeople learn that Magneto is a mutant. And when they find out, they literally go to his house while he's away and they set it on fire and his daughter dies. In response to that, he kills everybody, right? So it's very similar to what you saw in X-Men, was it First Class, I think it was, where he killed everybody in like one of the most awesome scenes ever, right? Where like that little piece of metal, the necklace or whatever it is, I don't remember what it is, passing through everybody's necks, that kind of thing, right? It's very much based on the old comics. And he says, is the world to come a place or a time? Am I truly beyond death or simply caught in some spell my daughter Wanda cast? Of course, some other room of waiting. Of course, referring to the waiting room here. And he says, as a boy, I was taught that how I lived my life should be the focus, that what came after was in the hands of God. But as a boy, I turned my back on God. I told Aurora that once. Now, here's the kicker. In the midst of all of this, Storm shows up. And this is when you get like this really amazing just kind of depth into the mind of Magneto. Because in a lot of ways in Marvel Comics, Magneto has largely just kind of been a surface level guy, in the sense that we haven't really gotten a whole lot of stories that dig deep down into why Magneto is the way he is. Outside of stories like Magneto Testament by Greg Pak, or any of the classic X-Men stories, specifically those that feature the stories of Anya, or some of the early days of Magneto's events. Even when he took over the X-Men, right? In Uncanny X-Men issue number, what was it, 200, The Trial of Magneto, shortly after that, took over the team and New Mutants and everything. It's difficult to find stories that really focus on why he is the way he is. And what he does is, in this wall that he's looking at, these are all the people that he's ever killed. And even Storm looks at that and she says, there are thousands of names on this wall alone, dozens of walls in this city of judgment. Did they all die at your hand? And he says, by my hand or in my name, by action or inaction, by intent or accident, those I regret and those that I don't. They all count, Aurora. Now, if we say that there are maybe 4,000 names on this one wall, and there are dozens and dozens of walls, you can see how easily that number exceeds 100,000. If not more. This number is potentially in the millions, because one of the things to remember is that while Magneto didn't necessarily kill them all, a lot of mutants out there did it in his name. Fabian Cortez, all those guys, right? So the thing here is he pulls down a name, Christopher Bach, a mutant hater with a scheme to make people afraid of me as if they weren't already. Many died, I've counted their names. In the end, I dropped a few tons of rubble on him and his followers. And when Cyclops asked what became of him, I lied. I said, I don't know. I regret the lie. Now here's where these numbers grow exponentially, right? Say for example that this guy Bach had a wife, and that when he was killed, his wife took her own life. And because she had friends or family who struggled in that way, maybe they lashed out and they attacked somebody else and cost somebody else their life. So the actions of Magneto create this chain reaction of death and destruction. And so that's what he means when he says, by my hand, in my name, right? By my action or inaction, by intent or by accident, even just collateral damage in his fight against various members of the mutant community, specifically the X-Men. He says, I've been here for some time. I've read almost every name by choice to acknowledge the full weight of Magneto upon the world, the blood that I simply accepted. To save one life is to save the world, my teacher said. Now you see this, my great work. And so it's almost poetic in the way that he says it, right? Like Ozymandias, right? Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Now it's different from what Ozymandias meant, right? When Ozymandias said that, he said that in the context of, look how great my kingdom is. No ruler that ever comes after me will ever have a kingdom as great as this. So all they will know is despair because they can never live up to me. Of course, we know that's not necessarily the case, but with Magneto, it's more of, look at all these people who have died because of me and despair, because no one will ever kill as many people as I have. Right? In one form or another. It's tragic, and it's a way for him to just kind of bring all this pain and suffering onto himself. And that's really the crux of all of this. Magneto in this place of torment, in this place of pain, it's a self-created hell that he's here just literally wallowing in sorrow and misery constantly, that he sees all these people and he sees all these walls and all these names, all these things, and he just kind of lets it completely and totally dominate him and control him. And that's what makes it so interesting, because we all do that in some capacity, right? Whether it's the weight of our past decisions or things that we've done, the fact that our life isn't where we want it to be, and so instead of getting it to a better place, we just wallow in pity and we blame the world and we post about it on Twitter or Reddit or whatever, right? A lot of us have all experienced that in some way. The difference between those who have courage and conviction and those who don't is that they correct that problem. They say, this is not where I want to be in my life, so I'm going to do something about it, as opposed to just sitting around all day complaining and then doing nothing to fix the problem, right? Doing things changes things. Doing nothing keeps things exactly the way they are. And so Storm counters all of this, and she says, the world is not done with us, but if this is truly what you want, I'm sorry. I know Krakoa could not bring your daughter back. And that's what Magneto says, yes, right? My great failure. And this is where you get to see how Magneto viewed Krakoa, because on the surface, we saw Krakoa as kind of this place that he was proud of, right? That's sort of the iconic scene that he has, where he meets with all those humans and he tells them, you have new gods now, right? We as the mutant population are taking our rightful place in this world. And if you try to stop us, we will kill you and the man next to you. And that will go on until everyone is dead. But the reality here is he had a much darker view of it than any of us were led to believe. And it was all mired in guilt, right? He says, we were children playing a game of nation building. To appease Charles' sense of right and wrong, I suggested a nation of laws. And we spoke of those laws in high and poetic cadence, and thus made 3 laws that cared more for poetry than for people. And in my hubris, I enforced those unenforceable laws. I stood in front of my fellow mutants and condemned them to exile in the pit, as if they were a piece of Victor Creed brutal inconveniences to be wished away. Now, for those of you guys who don't recall what it was that happened to Sabretooth in this moment, that goes all the way back to the very beginning of the X-Men run that kind of kicked all this off. That Sabretooth was sent on a mission, but Sabretooth was also unpredictable, and he really was viewed as an inconvenience. So he was essentially locked away. He was unfairly imprisoned in the pit, which is just kind of like this infinitely expansive space in the center of the island where you can kind of remake it and turn it into your own reality. Of course, as you can imagine, Sabretooth turned it into a place where he killed the X-Men all the time. But it was a place where they just kind of dropped people that they didn't want to think about, that they just didn't want to have to focus on anymore, right? Just put them in the pit, forget about them, done. But the funny thing about this is Storm responds and says, I've done the same thing. Right, when I fought Vulcan, the long lost brother of Cyclops, right? I mean, we've known who he is for a while, but like when I fought him, I wrote him off, I dismissed him, right? And she says, our sins belong to us all, right? We have to atone for those. The mistakes that we make in this life are nobody else's fault but our own. And it's one of those things where she kind of hits on this idea that sure, circumstances can lead us down a path and they can put us in a place where we end up doing things that we don't necessarily want to do or whatever the case is. But once you realize the error of your ways, then it's your job to fix it. Right? It's like this book that I read once, right? It's not your fault that you're screwed up, but it is your fault if you stay screwed up. And so Magneto says, even so, at that point, I could lie to myself that there was justice in the systems I helped create, that those I condemned had done things worth condemning. But then came the end of that lie. And that was the whole role of Toad and the idea of the waiting room. Now, one of the things to understand here is that Magneto put so much faith in the laws of Krakoa as if they were this kind of immutable, indestructible thing. But the reality of the world that we live in is that there are no absolute laws. It's just whatever rules that we follow in society at that point in time. And what was an absolute truth yesterday can be an absolute lie today. It's just the way society works. Things are ever shifting, ever changing for any number of reasons. It's just the result of what happens when you live in a group where there are millions of people, each one with their own individual ideas on how things should be done. That everything just kind of shifts and changes and so on and so forth. But the idea is that Toad had basically taken the fall for the death of Scarlet Witch. That was the ruse that was created. When Scarlet Witch said, I need to die so I can create the waiting room, it had to look real. It couldn't just look like she offed herself because then they wouldn't bring her back. It had to look like her life was taken away against her will. And then Magneto would plead on her behalf. The lie was that Toad took the blame for it. And so in turn, he was locked away in the pit. He was confined to that place. Now that of course allowed the whole process of resurrection, but it's a thing where he says, Wanda would have never agreed ahead of time, but Mortimer did. Of course, Mortimer being Toad. And he says, deep down, he still loved her and he still followed me. I must judge myself, Aurora. Was I not the judge of a nation? Before that, did I not judge humanity and find it wanting? Shall not the judge of the world do right? And that's really kind of the crux of all this. It's really the core of everything that he's feeling, right? That he can't really create this kind of arbitrary moral standard for himself and then say, rules for thee, not for me, right? Like, you can't be the person that judges everybody and then turn around and for just shoulder shrug, arbitrary reasons, but I'm beyond being judged. Like, are you? What makes you beyond being judged? Because just saying you are isn't enough, right? Like, you need some irrefutable proof that you are beyond contestation, and no one is, right? And so that's his argument. If I am going to judge an entire world, if I'm going to be the guy who judged humanity, then I'm the guy who deserves to be judged because I'm not special. And so Storm, in hearing all of this, is just kind of like, I think I should speak to Wanda and I should ask her perspective on all of this. Now, that doesn't happen in this comic. Instead, Magneto lashes out and almost kind of attacks, or at least goes to attack Storm. But that's when Storm starts talking about the fall of the House of X. Because remember, Magneto died during Judgment Day. So the idea of like the Hellfire Gala massacre and all that kind of stuff, that happened after he was gone. He doesn't know that the mutant population on Earth is being hunted to extinction by humanity. He has no clue that that's going on. And so Storm tells him everything. And he says, I told you to watch Xavier. Just as I predicted, I told you he does not have the ability to do what needs to be done. Myself and Xavier were a 1-2 punch, that Xavier was an idealist. Xavier believed, hope against hope, that a peaceful coexistence could happen between the human population and the mutant population, but I told him that is a fool's errand, because if the human race wanted to peacefully coexist with the mutant population, they would have done it by now. The fact that they've chosen not to means they don't want to. So why would you assume that they ever will, right? We represent the ending of them. Would you really want to be friends with a person that has the gun to your head and it's just a countdown before they pull the trigger, right? So it's just one of these really cool moments, these cool kind of philosophical discussions here, because Magneto fills with rage, but instead of taking that rage and channeling it outward and looking at like humanity's got to go and they've got to suffer and all that kind of stuff, he internalizes it all, right? And like he pulls out this name, Sharon Friedlander, an ally of mutant kind killed by Joanna Cargill because she thought it was what I would want. Had I given her reason to doubt it? Can I be forgiven? No. He reaches for another name, Ilya Popov of the Leningrad. When it attacked me, I sent it to the seafloor to make my point. This was just an innocent kid on a ship. He was 19 years old. Can I be forgiven? Never. I reached for another name, Faina Moroz, a witness at the back of the crowd when Anya died. She froze in fear, wept, felt helpless. Then a tide of magnetic force took her life. Can I be forgiven? I refuse forgiveness. And so he finally reaches for another name, and that name is his own. And that is the very kernel at the center and the heart of all of this. Magneto cannot forgive himself. He cannot forgive himself for all the things he's done and all the lives that he's taken. And that's really where growth happens the most, is sitting down and saying, okay, so like I did some really crappy stuff over the course of my life. Now, most of us haven't really been engaged in a constant attempt at genocide, but the fact remains, right? Like sitting down and saying like, I have done a series of things or a few things over the course of my life that have in some form or fashion harmed people. Have I learned from it? Yes. Am I going to dwell on it? No. Can I make amends for it? Potentially. So I should try. And that's the best that you can do, right? We as human beings are reactionary. It's only ever after we've done something that we realize the thing we did was the thing that we shouldn't have done. We just kind of go through life committing to a series of actions. And every action that we engage in teaches us to move forward in a wiser way. But the fact is, Magneto cannot let that go. He just cannot let that part of himself leave. And so Storm does it for him. What she does is she says, nothing is out of our hands, right? This sense of helplessness that Magneto has. And she says, open your eyes and see. And what she shows him is not all the people that have died at his hands, but all the lives that have been saved at his hands. And that's where you really get the full view of this world that Magneto lives in, which is that he spends so much time focusing on everything he's done wrong. He spends so much time focusing on everything that has gone wrong that he never really spent any time focusing on what went right. It's like people who complain about the MCU right now. And so what you get here is Magneto coming to this realization that, okay, fine, like if this is the case, I have saved lives. It instills in him a renewed sense of vigor and the recognition that there is something meaningful about his existence. He has more to offer the world than death and destruction. And so he takes out the key. That's why I told you it was going to be important. But here's the thing. Here's where the story goes crazy, because what happens is that with this key, the expectation is that it would open a door that would bring him back to life. That doesn't happen. The door goes down deeper. He's only on the first level of suffering and torment. When he gets down there, it is just a cold and dark place, and they're met with a voice, and eagle-eyed readers of Marvel Comics will already know who this guy is, right? This guy laughs and he says, look at you both, the weather witch, restless, rootless as the breeze. Have you found a home now, found joy, found community? You will turn your back on it, Aurora Monroe, as you turn your back on everything you love, save for the ex that does not love you back. And you, the wounded king who abandoned the world but won't let it go on without him. Do you really think that you could lay your own ghost to rest, Max? Or is it Eric? or Magnus? Can you shed your crimes as simply as you shed your many names? And he says, oh dear Magneto, you might as well fight your own shadow, because Storm and Magneto have just come face to face with the Shadow King, one of the most powerful entities to ever exist in the history of Marvel Comics. And that's why, as this story picks up, Storm is met by the face of Annihilation. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with who Annihilation is, she was a really cool character, and she was introduced during Jonathan Hickman's run on the X-Men, but she was very ambiguous. But we're actually going to get some answers about the nature of her character. All we knew about Annihilation was that she was a kind of entity, goddess, right? A force of nature, if you want to call it that. Her essence was confined in the golden mask that you see here, and those individuals who donned her mask were usually corrupted by her presence and her power, and ultimately did her bidding. She ended up initiating something called the Genesis War, which basically saw Storm and what few mutants were left on Mars going to war against all her forces. They somehow won by the skin of their teeth, but it was a really, really cool story. The important takeaway from all this is we knew nothing about her, right? And so that's why as they talk, she says, Storm, did you really believe that we were done? And the response of Storm is, yes, right? I really believed that we were finished here. Now she does ask, where is Max, right? Where's Magneto? And it's like, well, I sent him far away. But notice the conversation between them, right? When she says, I ended you when I ended the Genesis War, the response of Annihilation is, you melted some gold, destroyed a shape I'd taken, cut me off from the physical space. To end me is more difficult. And so Storm's response, she immediately picks up on what's going on here, which is a testament to how capable Storm is, but also the fact that she's done this dance before with this particular person. And what she says is, so you say, when we arrived, another spoke to me, an essence of evil the X-Men know well, a being who has possessed many poor souls to ruin many lives, who may wear your golden face now. We knew him as the Shadow King. Now the response of Annihilation is, so Annihilation was truly a mask, or the Shadow King is the face of Annihilation. Perhaps you're thinking too small, Wind Rider. Now, here's the important thing to understand, right? He responds and he says, perhaps we are legion, each with our own name and role, yet each aligned. Perhaps you've battled us many times in many borrowed guises. Perhaps you battle us every day of your life and on into the future in endless war. And so I ask again, Aurora, are we done? And that's why Storm says, no, we're never done. So something to understand about the Shadow King in Marvel Comics, and his nature is very ambiguous to a lot of people who are even familiar with Marvel, and he's ridiculously obscure to those who are not. The Shadow King is basically the very nature of what it means to be evil. In Marvel Comics, the idea of evil is really kind of a cloak and dagger thing, and Marvel plays it fast and loose. You could look at the demon Mephisto and think that he's kind of the representation of like Satan in Marvel Comics, and he's inherently evil. Not really. He's just a hell lord. He just steals your soul when you make a deal with him and you die, and like that's it. That's really all it is. The idea of true, genuine, unadulterated evil, that's the Shadow King. This guy is malevolent. This guy wants to do nothing more than sow chaos and reap war. But notice as he shifts these phases, one of the things that Marvel toys with here is that Annihilation herself was just a facsimile of the Shadow King, right? A variant of the Shadow King, an essence of the Shadow King. In the same way that Null the Symbiote God and the Chaos King and those guys are all kind of part and parcel to the cosmic entity Oblivion. Now, Marvel's not saying this hard and fast, but they're kind of throwing it out there. And it's cool to see that that's the case, right? They're actually providing a basis to this character, that the Shadow King as a multiversal force of just evil out there in Marvel Comics permeates virtually every facet of every dimension and every realm and everywhere. There's never truly defeating this guy. That'll never happen. And so there's a kind of musing that goes on here, right? No hesitation at all. Be honest with me, Eric. She'd have made a great evil mutant, wouldn't she? Right? This this, of course, is basically us switching over to Magneto, having a conversation with quote-unquote Xavier. Now, of course, Xavier is the Shadow King in this instance, and Magneto's well aware of what's going on as well, right? He even says, frankly, I doubt she'd have put up with me, and you can drop this facade that you've put on, Shadow King. I find it insulting. Charles deserves better than to speak your line. So right off the bat, both Storm and Magneto know exactly who this guy is, but as opposed to the years past where the Shadow King would just try to like possess them and take off into the real world, instead it's a place of testing. Right, and so it's really cool the way this happens, right? The Shadow King responds and says, oh, are you telling me with all you've learned, there is no shadow in Charles Xavier? Do you really believe that, Eric? The response of Magneto, he's a good man. And then Shadow King chimes in and he says, we must be aware of good men, mustn't we? Charles, most of all. Is that why you named your opposing force the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants? Now, here's another thing that the Shadow King is hitting on here. When he talks about we must watch out for somebody like Xavier, keep in mind that Xavier does have a darker side. And there was a point in Marvel Comics in the 1990s when the darker side of Xavier and the darker side of Magneto merged together, and they gave us Onslaught, this psychic entity of just pure malevolence with a desire to conquer everything, and he almost did. Right? Like Onslaught was a hair's breadth from killing the Marvel Universe had it not been for really Franklin Richards and Arishem, right? Like had that not happened, the entire Marvel Universe would have been dead. For those of you guys who don't know what that means, not a great big huge deal. Franklin Richards, this godly, powerful kid who resurrected all the dead superheroes in the Onslaught saga. But the important thing here is that Magneto says, I've explained that 100 times. The oppressor applies the label, the libel, to the oppressed. We are evil for existing, and thus all other evils they can imagine must apply. I was making a point. Now in turn, the Shadow King says, yes, you're always making points. It's always so much more subtle than simply wanting to create fear, isn't it, Eric? Now here's the cool thing that goes along with this. Eric, in a lot of ways, right, Magneto, Max, whatever you want to call him, in a lot of different capacities, he kind of plays the victim card pretty consistently. And I know a lot of Magneto fans won't really want to hear that, but like, hear me out for a second. Right? Magneto, in almost every single instance where he makes some campaign to launch an attack against the X-Men or the Avengers or the entirety of the Marvel Universe, whatever it is, I've seen you guys and I've seen what the world can be and I don't want to end up like that and that kind of thing. He carries a massive chip on his shoulder. Now, whether or not that is a righteous chip to carry or whether or not he's just throwing out the victim card because it's a way for him to justify his actions really changes from one story to the next, and it changes based on your perception of his character. But here yet again, instead of standing up and saying, no, I chose that name because I wanted to instill fear in the hearts and minds of everybody out there that would ever challenge the mutant population, that would ever look at us and see that we're a group that can be easily pushed over, subdued, controlled, contained, that they were wrong for believing that, right? And we know he feels that way because there was a point in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run when he gathers like all these world leaders together. And he's like, I know how much you humans love your symbolism, and I want you to know, I need you to know, you have new gods now. So we know that he wants to like instill fear in the hearts and minds of humanity, that messing with the mutant population is a fool's errand and effectively a suicide run. And the Shadow King calls him on it. Even when he refers to him as Eric, his response, stop calling me that, you're not Charles. Now the Shadow King says, you met him as Eric Lyncher, so that's how he thinks of you. But you're going by Max now, aren't you? Your attempt to finally drop all the masks. Only there's one mask left, isn't there? Tell the truth. However much you'd like to be Max again, what's your true name? What's the name in your heart? His response? Magneto, because that's who he really is. And that's the cool thing about all this, right? It really paints this picture, just that moment when he says, like, of all the names that I've ever had in my time in the Marvel Universe, when I was living in the concentration camps in World War II, when I had a name, when I escaped during the liberation of the concentration camps, I met my wife Magda, we found an identity forger, and I got a new name. When I went underground, and when I was believed to have been dead and I had a name, of all the names that I've had in existence, Magneto is the one true name that I have, because that is really who I am. And that's when the old Magneto personality emerges here, and it just kind of challenges him. He comes face to face with himself. This old school personality says the human race no longer deserves dominion over the planet. The day of the mutants is upon us, and the first phase of my plan will be to show my power, to make Homo sapiens bow to Homo superior. Now at that point, you jump back over to Storm, right? And she kind of has this little bit of an inner monologue here, right? She says, Goddess, Omega, all these I have been called, and more. All these I have answered to, but I must back up such easy talk. And so where the Shadow King responds and says, look at you, Aurora, whose name means beauty, so powerful, so perfect, she muses to herself yet again. Kurt told me about this one, the first fallen, the primal opposite to the phoenix, according to the Watcher. For the phoenix is death and rebirth, and the fallen can only be stagnation. Is that who I am? Beautiful perfection, the Omega's Omega, the goddess on her throne, never failing, never permitted to fail. Am I to be allowed no flaw? No, I will not be caged, demon, not by you or anybody else. Now, here's the thing. Here's one of the coolest things about Storm and Marvel Comics. Over the years in Storm's character, and this is what she's referencing here, right? The Omega's Omega, the goddess on her throne, that kind of thing. Storm has played a lot of very significant roles. In the early days of Marvel Comics, or at least her appearance in Marvel Comics, kind of going from giant-size X-Men into future stories and even referencing the backstories, Storm's most significant moments came in things like taking over leadership of the Morlocks. While this kind of allowed Callisto to basically operate as a proxy, right? Kind of the person that is her field commander of the Morlocks. She's the one that keeps an eye on the Morlocks when Storm's not there, and Storm just leaves to basically never come back, which in effect makes Callisto the leader of the Morlocks. The fact remained, the fate of the Morlocks rested on her shoulders. In Uncanny X-Men issue 201, when Cyclops leaves the team, her and Cyclops battle for leadership of the X-Men, and she overtakes that role. Now, the survival of the X-Men on any particular mission rests on her shoulders. Time and time again, this has been the case. When she found love with Black Panther again in her life for the second time after their childhood, the two of them get married, she becomes an emissary to Wakanda for the X-Men. She leads a double life. When the events of Avengers vs. X-Men pop off and her and Black Panther split and go their separate ways, it's yet another blow. The idea that Storm has to always be perfect. She has to always be at the top of her game. If she fails, everything fails. But notice this, right? The Shadow King asked the question, really? Not even yourself? Will you have any other choice? You wouldn't listen in your own reality, but now you're in my house. Now it's just you and me, and it's my turn to speak. I misread you last time we spoke. You couldn't listen then. Your responsibilities would not permit it, and you are addicted to responsibility. Flitting from one to another like a butterfly, like a magician spinning plates. Can a Rocco be free if you're not there to free it? Can Earth have a voice in the galaxy if you're not there to voice it? Is evil ever fought if you're not the one fighting it? Can the world go on without Aurora Monroe? And what it does is it puts on this idea, right? It literally counters every point that she makes. You know, yeah, Storm, life is so hard. You have so much responsibility. You can never fail. And you know why? Because you make life hard, and because you give yourself so much responsibility, and you give yourself the statement that you can't fail. You've made your life hard, and now you want to complain about the difficulty of how hard life is, right? It's almost like that scene from The Devil's Advocate, right? Al Pacino, Keanu Reeves. Who are you carrying all those bricks for anyway, huh? God? Is that it? God, right? It's that whole kind of monologue here, right? It's just let it all go. Just walk away. And he even asked the question, how many times have you saved the world, Aurora? How often have the X-Men saved the universe? Only because you were there. You were the only reason the X-Men succeeded, the only reason they came out on top. Why? Had it not been for Aurora Monroe, like the X-Men never would have stood a chance. Of course not. That's just crazy talk, because you're so important, because you have so much responsibility and so much power.
She immediately responds, right? Enough of this mockery, Shadow King. Every shape you borrow is an insult to me or to others. Take your own and be done. Or are you claiming to be every demon the X-Men have ever fought, right? She's literally sidestepping all the points that he's making. Well, I mean, stop insulting me and mocking me. Like it's literally that, right? So what does he say? I cannot claim that. We are all ourselves here, even if we're also something else. But a light casts many shadows in many shapes, and shadow is shadow. Box the world into categories so simple, so controlled, and you're choosing a neat lie over a messy truth, because the reality is the world cannot be contained. There are as many perspectives of the world as there are people in it, and it's impossible to take all these different concepts of reality, confine them down into these very neat and organized boxes because it makes you feel safe. The truth is the world's chaotic and messy and oftentimes problematic. Life's hard. Wear a helmet. And so he says, and that path leads to my territory, Aurora. Remember how I tricked you? Forge does. And look at your buddy, what's his name? Max. Now there's a man who sees life in categories. Because the reality here is that in a lot of ways, they both do. Right? Aurora's prison is a prison that she's fashioned out of taking all this responsibility on her shoulder, of really buying into her own hype with all the power that she has. And it's not to marginalize her power. Storm's one of the most powerful mutants in Marvel Comics. I mean, Marvel's established that, right? Like the Omega level mutant of all the Omega level mutants. No doubt it was done because, X-Men 97, but the fact remains, that's true. She's ridiculously overpowered, but it doesn't change the fact that her life is hard because she makes it hard, because she wants it to be hard, because for whatever reason, that's how she defines what it means to be an X-Man in the world. Magneto is the same way. His prison is his past. His prison is his experience, his torments, the things he's been through, the inability to walk away from it all. That's his cage. And as he's talking to himself, he says, I see you. And that's when his past self says, remember, we are Homo superior. We are born to rule the earth. The humans must be our slaves. They are our natural enemies. And together, with our superhuman powers, we can conquer them all. Now, the kicker is that that's how Magneto used to think. And if it strikes you as being kind of comedic and being old school and being nonsensical, that's a testament to how much Magneto's character has changed and how he's been written to change over the years in Marvel Comics. He's nothing like the old school Magneto. Nothing like the guy from way back in the day. There's a little more pomp and circumstance, a little more maturity, right? A little more brazenness than there used to be, but he is certainly not the same guy. And that's why he says, enough. No need to shame me further with my own ill-considered words. And that's when this voice responds, which is in effect the Shadow King. You dare say that in my presence? Have you forgotten that our personal feelings are nothing? It is the plan that is all important. And he says, ah, yes, the plan. My great scheme to give humanity a single target to focus on. His old self's response, the Shadow King's response, of course, humans are like sheep. They respond to certain stimuli, and fear is one of the most potent. Now, this is where things get cool, because Magneto, in listening to all of this, says, yes, I remember telling myself exactly that Charles Carrots would not tempt the humans to justice without an opposing stick. Magneto would be the iron rod to beat sense into the humans, and if it became necessary, into Charles and his students. How quickly it became unnecessary. Charles once told me that humans and mutants could create a golden age on Earth if we could only work side by side. I forget my exact response to that particular utopian notion, but I suspect that you remember. That's when his older self responds, never, right? It's just like, the humans must be our slaves. They are not worthy to share dominion of Earth with us. You have made your choice forevermore. We are mortal foes. And that's where Magneto says, yes, I made a choice. I chose to reject Charles and later to reject you. But to live is to learn. And perhaps having learned to choose again, I see you, Magneto, and there is still a place for us in the broken land. I do not deny you. I will not ignore you. You are a part of me, perhaps the most foundational part. You are my rage, my justified anger in response to the monstrous crimes against me and mine. Should I forgive those evils? Should I forget? Remember only my daughter's laugh, never her screams? So I am told. So I am often told. But if I cannot forgive, not even myself, where does that leave us? Now, this is a really, really cool statement here, right? Because what it says is it's really Magneto coming to the realization, if this old school version is his yin, then he is his own yang. Two sides of the same coin. This version of Magneto that you see before you now is a lot more mature. He's older, wiser, he's lived. He's realized the world is not as simple as he would like it to be. No matter how hard he fights and screams and beats his hands against the wall, the world will not change for him. One, because he's not important enough, and he never was. And two, because the complexity of the world and the people therein is what makes the world so fascinating in the first place. If everybody believed the same thing and walked the same way and talked the same way and had the same viewpoints, the world would be really, really, really boring. It would really, really suck. And so that's why he says, you are me and I am you. I cannot forget you, nor should I. That yes, I will remember the cries of my daughter Anya as she burned alive in a house that was set on fire by villagers who feared what I was. And I will not forget how swiftly I killed them with the vengeance of literally a pissed off God. But I also will not forget her laughter. I will not forget how she made me feel when I saw a smile on her face or when she called me her father. These two things must coexist. And he says, throughout my life, I have repressed the rage in me until it exploded, or I have given it free rein over all decision. But I cannot return to the world and return to the same path. I must change. I must evolve. So I acknowledge all that I have done. I admit all that I am. I own the shadow that is in me. And if this is the engine that drives me, let it drive me to a better world. A world for all who are hated and feared. The response of this Magneto personality, effectively the Shadow King, we'll see. And so what you do is you switch back to Storm. You guys see what I'm talking about how dope this comic is. So you switch back to Storm, right? And she's like, so now what? Do we come to an agreement? The response of the Shadow King, I've said my piece. You could accept me, acknowledge that I am simply part of the human heart, go your own way, and allow me to work in the world. Or you could do what the cosmos allowed you to do on this journey to defend it by rejecting me and doing battle. Forces are in motion, Aurora. It is a very good time to take me out of the picture. Shift the balance in favor of my opposite number. Do you stick or do you twist? Now her response, right, in thinking about this, like she knows the Shadow King well enough to know, as a malevolent force that's always manipulating and always tricking and always twisting in order to get his way, she says he presents the decision as a binary, two categories, but that of course is one of his traps. I must accept him, acknowledge his part in the tapestry of existence, respect that he is as he is according to his role, so I can fight him with every drop of my blood, for the shadows in us must be seen in order to be truly beaten, and evil is never fought if someone is not fighting it. Now, here's the cool thing, right? This is very like Trial of Reed Richards like. And for those of you guys who don't know what I mean, in Marvel Comics, there was an iconic story, landmark story, one of the most important Galactus stories in the history of Marvel Comics. It was called The Trial of Reed. Reed Richards had saved the life of Galactus and was put on trial by the empires of the universe. The argument being that by ensuring that Galactus survives, because he will travel from world to world and consume the life-sustaining energies killing billions, that Reed has basically doomed untold trillions to into existence. The response was that the cosmic entities appeared, specifically eternity, if my memory serves me correctly, and he tells everybody there, Galactus has to exist. He's a fundamental force of existence. If he doesn't exist, the universe will literally break down. That's his role, as it's my role as eternity to encapsulate all of creation. Reed did exactly what he was supposed to do. I find him not guilty, and my decision is beyond contestation. So, deuces, like that's basically what it was. It was pretty cool, you know, the way that it was done. But at the end of the day, the Shadow King kind of taunts Storm, right? When she comes to this realization that shadows are an inherent part of us. We all experience evil. We all experience malevolence. We all experience hate and anger and all these things, right? But we are at all times a yin and yang. And the goal is to maintain a kind of balance. For every instance for us being pissed off, we have hopefully an instance of us being happy. So we're not just walking around like people who are perpetually angry, spewing anger and vitriol all over the world, right? That's reserved for the people on Twitter. So what the Shadow King says is, that's the spirit, Aurora. Who else has the power, the will to take me on? Who can free your people? Who will save the world? You, Aurora Monroe, the goddess who never fails. You alone. And that's when Storm comes to the realization of what's going on, that she's not alone, right? And she even says that. She says, and suddenly I see the last trap, a subtle one, and expertly baited, me alone as I came here, as if I had no other choice, as if it was somehow dishonorable to do otherwise, as if teamwork, solidarity, friendship, love, these were somehow weaknesses. Perhaps they are to a demon, but I am an X-Man, Shadow King. We are never alone. And that's when she realizes her and Magneto have literally just been standing side by side the entire time. But each one has been going through this trial in their own minds in dealing with the Shadow King. But by unifying their forces together, right, unifying their power together, they literally overcome him, right? Storm says, in a heartbeat, Max is at my side, joining my fight. How could it be otherwise? Instinctively, he knows what must be done. But then, we've done it before on Arakko, i.e. Mars. Pooled our powers, fed my life force to him in a single attack, a perfect mutant circuit. Even in this place beyond death, we can give our lives against the great enemy of life, the Shadow King. Fearful and furious at the failure of his trick, tries to break the link, but the energies have built too far now, and they are only building further, back and forth, taking more of me with every pass. And when the storm breaks, comes the moment of release, and the Shadow King screams. This guy is defeated. Now, he's not killed, and he can never truly be killed. He can only ever really be defeated in any particular situation, basically kept at bay. He effectively just left, and that's really it. And so Storm tells Magneto to turn the key again, right? Remember, the key that he was given on some previous mission, he had no idea what it meant, but when he died, he had the key with him, and the key was basically unlocking the door for him to go through his kind of purgatory journey and then hopefully find some way back to the land of the living. And that's why she says, turn your key again, return to the world, fight for it. And he says, no, not at this cost, not at the cost of one more innocent life, human or mutant, not one more, not while I have the power to say no. And where Storm says, don't be absurd, it's out of our control. The response of Magneto, nothing is out of our hands. And she says, his anger overflows like the Magneto who was, channeled with molten iron into new paths, into the Magneto who will be. And he says, if I can draw on your life, Aurora, you can draw on mine. I give it freely. I have the power. I am the power. Take it and call it forth. And so this literally snaps Storm back to reality, right? She basically comes back to life, where she's there with Adam Brashear and Galactus's mom. I know that last statement sounds crazy. Yes, Galactus has a mom. She hangs out with Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel. I can explain how that goes down. If you guys are interested, let me know down in the comments section. But basically, Storm wakes up here, right? And it's kind of like, okay, right? Adam Brashear is like, I'm glad you're back with us. You gave us quite a scare. What were you thinking? And she literally says that you don't cheat death by playing it safe. We did it, Adam. Look. And through this portal, Magneto enters back into the real world and he says, "Who am I? I am power." And he says, "Men call me Magneto." Literally, this guy is reborn. Here's the question that you have to ask. With this new level of resolve, does Magneto now have a new level of power? Now that he's back from the dead, he's basically been told everything that's happened by Storm. Orcus attacking the mutant population, 250,000 some odd mutants who are all believed to be dead, that those mutants who do remain on Earth are just fleeing for their lives. They're launching attacks where they can, when they can. Cyclops has his forces, he's taking pot shots, and Iron Man is building Mysterium armor designed to overcome Orcus by basically using adamantium. And so what Magneto does is when he emerges, he literally says, "It's strange. I don't know what hat to wear. The memory of my post-death experience already feels like a dream. I woke from it to portal energy on my skin instead of the yolk of a golden egg, to ocean's blue instead of Krakoa's green and Arako's red, to the uneasy understanding that everything had changed." Because again, something to remind you guys of, for those of you guys who forgot, Magneto died during Judgment Day. So he died before the whole attack by Orcus and everything. The last time he was alive, mutants were living on Mars, mutants were living on Earth. Things could be going better, but they weren't that bad. Everything has gone to pot like that as far as he's concerned. And so what you get is this amazing moment, because when Magneto emerges here, he goes straight to the prison cells in this Orcus facility that hold all these different mutants, right? Thousands of mutants are here. Now, we don't know everything that Orcus is doing with them. We know that they were experimenting on them, but as far as we're aware, there are no Omega level mutants here. These are just different mutants with varying degrees of power, which may or may not be interesting. But as far as Magneto is concerned, a mutant is a brother or a sister. Therefore, they deserve to be freed and removed from the oppression of Orcus. And so immediately he shows up and starts taking these guys out, like right off the bat. But that's not the cool part, because what ends up going on is one of these guys say, "Get Squad Zero here," right? Squad Zero is the one that we need. And so what happens is that when this squad emerges on the scene, they basically start baiting Magneto. He asks the question, why hold back? Because even among the powerful, I am power, and power carries weight. Power makes ripples in the world. My action, my inaction, my conscious example, my unwitting inspiration, I help, I harm, I save life, I end it. What should my choice be? What is my responsibility? Which hat should I wear? Which Magneto will I be? Now, this is one of the most important things here, right? Yes, he is kind of speaking in rhyme and so on, but one of the cool things that we saw in the last video that we covered, which again, you'll see a link to the playlist if you need to get caught up, but we'll also make a full story video, that he was basically mulling over who he had previously been. Make no mistake, if this was like the old school Magneto back in the day, these guys would have been killed on the spot, and he wouldn't have even batted an eye, right? He would have just been like, "And you're dead now, moving on," right? And that would have been it. But he's grown a lot more patient. He has really seen the error of being so reckless and letting hate and anger blind him. And so because of this, he's asking this kind of philosophical question: do I want to be the person that I was before? Or do I need to be a better version of myself? The reality here is there's just kind of like three facets to him, right? Three versions of himself. And that's even what he mulls over here, that when these guys basically teleport in, that he realizes they're baiting him, that they're trying to get him to attack. And right off the bat, he's like, something's off here. Right? Like taking time to think instead of just reacting, he realizes something's not quite right. And he says, my instinct tells me to wait and to pull my magnetic field as tight as possible. So these guys fire off and he stops the bullet about half an inch from hitting him. And that's when he realizes he is in the middle of a trap. And he says those magnetic fields that he was feeling, they were not weapons, they were sensors. And what he realizes here is that it's a perfect trap, right? A countermeasure for everything that he's capable of. Because what these guys say, right? They say these suits detect changes to local magnetic fields. They are very sensitive. And if any fancy magnetic powers touch them, nerve gas, floods, every single room in this prison. So Magneto's kind of faced with what seems to be this impossible choice. Either he lets them kill him almost immediately after coming back to life and potentially serve as some kind of a martyr, which may or may not work for the mutant population. If anything, the death of Magneto, considering the role he has, how powerful he is, and how he's revered, it would probably demoralize the mutant population, to be honest. Either he lets them kill him, or he kills these guys and kills thousands of mutants in the process. And that's when he kind of mulls over this philosophy. How would the Magneto of old react? Unthinking rage, single-minded vengeance, at any cost, even these innocent lives. And what would Charles Xavier do? Embrace self-sacrifice, fall nobly upon the offered sword. But these are hypotheticals. In the here and now, I see only one way to proceed. And what this does is it establishes just how powerful Magneto is, right? In the years in Marvel Comics, Magneto's power is usually done in some crazy grandiose display of power, right? There was an Exiles comic where he basically killed the world. You look at stories like Fatal Attractions where he basically launches an EMP that takes down power to every electrical source on the planet Earth. You see these crazy things. But while this display of power is small, it's insane, and it's probably the most crazy thing that he's ever done, right? He says, tripping the sensors will send an electrical impulse down a wire to a circuit almost instantaneously. Almost. This move will require confidence and strength, an experienced mind in a vital body. It would not require finesse, but anything that did would be too slow. I will have to remember their names. There's the sudden sound of every metal component inside the suits, every wire, every circuit, crushing down into 5 small, dense cores. The process ignores the 5 bodies inside the suits. The sound is wet. Unlike electricity in a wire, mutant power is instantaneous. The thing is done so quickly that no signal escapes, no gas is triggered, and yet it was the perfect trap with no way out. Neither white nor black then. And so literally what Magneto did, using his powers, he condensed their suits down to just these balls, as small as they could get. But it happened so fast that the electrical signals in the circuits didn't have time to react, right? This is absolutely nuts, right? It's crazy. And you kind of have to imagine these guys probably didn't feel anything. This happened before they even realized what was going on, right? It's like that submersible that went down to see the Titanic and imploded, right? It imploded faster than the brain can process pain. That's literally what's happening here. Right? And it's just this crazy, mind-blowing thing that Magneto's powers are so fine-tuned, he could kill these guys and destroy their suits before they could even send an electrical signal to a wire. It's nuts. It's probably the most insane display of his power that I've ever seen. And so once these guys are dead, of course, these cell doors open and everybody greets Magneto as a savior. But recognize this, it makes him kind of uncomfortable because it's not something he's readily familiar with. Even when you go and you look at Jonathan Hickman's run on the X-Men, starting with House and Powers of X, running all the way up to Inferno, Judgment Day, all that kind of stuff, Magneto, even during that time, was there, but kind of not there. He still had the sort of haughty kind of attitude that we were the most familiar with his character from years past, right? That phenomenal moment from, I think it's the first issue of House of X, maybe Powers of X, when he meets with those humans and he tells them, you humans love your symbolism and we mutants have our own nation now. So I want you to understand, and I need you to understand, you have new gods now. It's just that kind of thing. Magneto of old, very much the same way. Bow before my power. I am Magneto, the unstoppable. And sure, I'm not really doing it justice, right? But the fact remains here that Magneto, historically speaking, is a character that leads mutants into war by any means necessary. He will try to achieve his goal. He's very much like that quote of Dr. Doom from Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. May there be suffering and woe to all who stand in my way. But when he's suddenly greeted as a savior, oh my God, Magneto, you saved us. If it hadn't been for you, we would never be alive. it sort of makes him feel a little off because he's not used to hero worship due to the fact that he did something beneficial for the world. He's used to hero worship because he's basically followed by radicals and extremists who believe in going to the very ends, and whatever those ends happens to be, that it justifies whatever means got them there. So what you end up getting in the aftermath of this is, of course, you have Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel, and you have Storm, who are working together alongside Taya, the Mother of Galactus. Yes, we will make a video on her. You guys have been screaming about it in the comments section of the last video. Yes, we will do it. But of course, they open a portal which basically gets all these mutants to freedom, and then those Orchis soldiers who weren't killed are all basically taken to a detention center. But then a Stark Sentinel arrives on the scene. And this is where things get really interesting, because we're kind of getting a taste, right? You guys are probably noticing here. We're getting these incremental, little tidbits of what Magneto's capable of and what he is now. But this is an instance where it moves away from Magneto as a solo act, and it focuses on Magneto as part of a team effort, because these Stark Sentinels were designed by Tony Stark. And as we know in Avengers vs. X-Men, Tony Stark did kind of technically get the best of Magneto, but only because Magneto was distracted, right? Like, in a real fight, Magneto would obliterate Tony Stark, and it wouldn't even be close. Those books were cooked so bad, it wasn't even funny. But the bigger point here is this, right? These Sentinels were designed to take all comers, shy of Franklin Richards, who can warp reality or something along those lines. Most mutants will fall to the power of these Stark Sentinels 9 times out of 10. Even when Storm launches an attack using the lightning and everything, because Magneto's magnetism won't work, the Stark Sentinel responds and saying a countermeasure has been deployed. Yes, you are a goddess, you can control the weather, and that's cool and everything, but like, how do you fare against Sonics? Of what use is all your power when your brain is scrambled to mush because your ears won't stop ringing? And that's exactly what it does. It's a very subtle way to overpower Storm. Adam Brashear steps in, and Adam Brashear goes to attack this Stark Sentinel. And in turn, Adam Brashear is overcome by the Stark Sentinel, again, using technology developed by Tony Stark. Now, one of the things that's cool here is that Magneto even comments on that Adam Brashear has never truly trusted the Avengers. And that makes perfect sense, right? We know that his trust with the Avengers was a little sketchy, even with his original story from Kevin Grievous, right? The old Adam, the Legend of Blue Marvel story. It was really more because he saw the Avengers as a somewhat nefarious group that would create the rules, but then break the rules at the same time. Hey guys, the city is saved, right? The city's totally destroyed, that kind of thing. But a bigger point to be made here is during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, when Adam Brashear learned about the Illuminati and the fact that they were destroying worlds, that he was kind of flabbergasted that they never came to him, one of the smartest men in existence that could easily find a way to bring an end to the incursions, which in fact, if my memory serves me correctly, he figured out a solution on the spot. Right, just a way to end it, right? A way to keep that from happening. But the larger point here is he's never really trusted them. And so the fact that Tony Stark was basically developing Sentinels using technology and information for the purpose of neutralizing someone as powerful as Adam Brashear kind of solidifies the viewpoint that the Avengers cannot really be trusted. But in the midst of this great big huge fight, you basically have these kind of citizen journalists who show up here. They're not really bad guys, right? In fact, they stand for Mutant Liberation Now, which is to say they basically made their way to this Orchis facility for the purpose of exposing it, likely uploading the videos on YouTube and making the general public aware of what was going on. And so now the battle's kind of twofold, that you have Storm and Magneto and Blue Marvel that have to defeat this Sentinel, but at the same time, prevent these innocent people from being killed, because the response to the Sentinel is, I'll just destroy those guys, and that'll be the end of it. It's a really interesting scenario here, because in their pursuit of truth, they've actually made the situation worse. They've complicated everything. And so Magneto just kind of grabs, these pieces of the Orchis facility and turns them into a giant, a couple giant fists and starts pummeling the Sentinel. But he realizes that because of how durable it is, that it's not going to be defeated in that way. And so what he does is he says, Ororo, Adam, to me, we're going to make a human mutant circuit. This will require absolute trust in both of them. And when the question's asked, what kind of circuit? The response of Magneto, what else? An electromagnet. Call it a new spin on an old trick. Now, Storm realizes right off the bat that if he does this, it will kill him potentially, right? It has the ability to destroy him, to channel that much power, all the power of Adam Brashear, a living antimatter reactor, keeping in mind, this guy was powerful enough to destroy a facsimile of Shumagorath, and that's no small thing. A facsimile of Shumagorath is enough to kill the Avengers without breaking a sweat. The power of Storm, we already know, just from the various stories that have been told, she's arguably, short of Franklin Richards, the most powerful mutant on the planet Earth in Marvel Comics. But what's the response of Magneto here? Haven't you heard? I am not afraid of a life that ends. And so Storm calls on all her power, Magneto calls on all his power, and then literally Magneto says, the energy flow is unrelenting. The pain is unimaginable. So is my rage. I cannot touch the Sentinel magnetically. I cannot peel it open with my mind until the false face falls away, revealing what Orcus made, what they may have fed the entire world to in service of their hatred, the living form of fascism's ultimate lie, that there is anything underneath the facade of strength but a hollow shell of wires holding up a puppet, that there can be any strength in forsaken common humanity. And so literally, because of this power that Magneto is bestowing both onto them as well as borrowing from them, it's enough to rip open the face of this Sentinel and basically hit it directly in the head, which of course leads to the whole thing exploding and basically, being destroyed and so on and so forth. The day is effectively saved. And so what you get is this kind of moment where Magneto says, like, we should take this thing apart. We should study it, figure out any potential weaknesses that it may have. And while there will be time for that at some point in the future, Storm is met by a telepathic communication from Emma Frost. And this is where things get dope, because what she says is she's glad Magneto's back, but she needs Magneto's help in rescuing her husband. Now, those of you guys who have been following Fall of X, you guys know who Emma Frost's husband is. But for those of you guys who were not following the Fall of X, Emma Frost is married to Tony Stark. So what Magneto has to do is travel with Storm and Adam Brashear to rescue Iron Man so he can use his Mysterium armor and help the Avengers take out the threat of Orcus. So the question has to be asked, what's going to happen when these two guys meet, taking into account the fact that they are, by all standards of measurement, mortal enemies? With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.